Has overwhelmingly approved a sweeping $900 billion defense policy bill, setting the nation's defense priorities for the next year. It's a big to-do list item for the end of the calendar, so the House has done that. Now heads to the Senate, where it's also expected to pass and will then be signed by President Trump. The bill codifies much of the president's agenda, including authorizing the use of active duty troops along the southern border and eliminating diversity initiatives in the military. It also includes a pay raise for service members. But tucked inside the legislation are a few provisions at odds with the president's priorities. The bill seeks to limit U.S. troops from withdrawing from Europe and will likely send new military aid to Ukraine. It also requires the Defense Department to provide Congress with the full, unedited footage of the boat strikes in the Caribbean and Pacific.
The House has overwhelmingly approved a sweeping $900 billion defense policy bill, setting the nation's defense priorities for the next year. It's a big to-do list item for the end of the calendar. The House has done that. Now it heads to the Senate, where it's also expected to pass and will then be signed by President Trump. The bill codifies much of the president's agenda, including authorizing the use of active duty troops along the southern border and eliminating diversity initiatives in the military. It also includes a pay raise for service members. But tucked inside the legislation are a few provisions at odds with the president's priorities. The bill seeks to limit U.S. troops from withdrawing from Europe and will likely send new military aid to Ukraine. It also requires the Defense Department to provide Congress with the full, unedited footage of the boat strikes in the Caribbean and Pacific, withholding a quarter of Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth's travel budget if the Pentagon fails to comply. By the way, I am trying to do my best to gather all the information I can for you and share it with you. Please leave your likes and comments, and I would be grateful if you subscribed. Let's continue. Mike Johnson is in serious trouble, like career-ending, speakership-destroying, potentially taking down the entire Republican House majority kind of trouble. And the best part, he has absolutely no idea how to stop it. We're watching a political disaster unfold in real time, and it's going to result in Democrats taking back the House and sending tiny Mike Johnson back to whatever Louisiana swamp he crawled out of. Let me walk you through everything that's happening right now, because the full picture is even worse for Republicans than you might think. This isn't just about one bad month for Johnson. This is about a complete loss of control over his caucus, a party in full retreat from an unpopular president, and a political landscape that's shifting dramatically against Republicans heading into the 2026 midterms. Johnson has had an absolutely brutal month. It started with the debacle of the government shutdown, the longest in U.S. history. That alone should have been enough to end his speakership, but Republicans are so dysfunctional they can't even manage to replace their failed leadership. Then came the massive loss when a discharge petition overrode his authority and authorized the release of the Epstein files, something Johnson had fought against tooth and nail, and a major reason for the government shutdown in the first place. Think about what that means. Johnson was willing to shut down the entire federal government to prevent the Epstein files from being released. He was willing to furlough federal workers, stop government services, create chaos and uncertainty, all to protect whatever is in those files that Republicans are so desperate to keep hidden. And despite all that effort, despite grinding the government to a halt, he lost anyway. The discharge petition went through, the files are being released, and Johnson looks like a complete failure who can't accomplish his own objectives even when he's willing to blow up the government trying. That's not leadership. That's desperation. That's someone who has completely lost control of the situation and is flailing around trying to prevent the inevitable. But this week, Johnson faced another test with the defense spending authorization bill. On the surface, it might look like a win. The House overwhelmingly approved a $900 billion defense policy bill. It passed the House and is heading to the Senate. The bill codifies much of Trump's agenda. Seems like Johnson successfully pushed through major Republican legislation, right? Wrong. Because when you look at the details of how this bill actually passed and what's actually in it, the story is completely different. This wasn't a triumph of Johnson's leadership. This was Johnson barely surviving by making promises he probably can't keep to members of his own caucus who are ready to burn down his speakership at the first sign of betrayal. Let me explain what actually happened here. Prior to passage of the bill, a number of high-profile Republicans, including Marjorie Taylor Greene, opposed it. Johnson didn't have the votes. He was facing another embarrassing defeat, so he had to go begging to individual members of Congress, making specific guarantees to specific people just to get enough votes to pass a defense authorization bill, something that's normally not even that hard to pass. According to Axios, Johnson had to make extraordinary concessions. He promised Representative Anna Paulina Luna that the government would stop sending NGO funds to the Taliban. To get that promise, Johnson had to extract a commitment from Secretary of State Marco Rubio. He also promised to include a ban on central bank digital currency in an upcoming vote. And here's the kicker. Luna and others have vowed to sink any future bill along with Johnson's speakership if he goes back on his word. Think about what that means. Johnson is now hostage to every promise he made to get this bill passed. If he can't deliver on stopping NGO funds to the Taliban, his speakership is over. If he can't deliver on the digital currency ban, his speakership is over. He's basically written dozens of political checks that he may not be able to cash. And the moment one of them bounces, these same Republicans who reluctantly voted for this bill will move to remove him. This is the exact same pattern we saw with Kevin McCarthy and John Boehner before him. Johnson can't control his caucus, possibly because it's populated by absolute lunatics from gerrymandered districts who care more about their own pet issues than about functioning government or party unity. But wait, it gets so much worse for Johnson, because tucked inside this defense authorization bill are provisions that are completely at odds with Trump's priorities. The bill seeks to limit U.S. troops from withdrawing from Europe and will likely send new military aid to Ukraine. Two things Trump has actively opposed, so Johnson had to pass a bill that contradicts his own president's agenda just to survive politically. That's not strength. That's weakness masquerading as legislative achievement. And there's one more provision in this bill that's absolutely crucial and that Republicans are probably regretting already. The bill requires the Defense Department to provide Congress with the full, unedited footage of the boat strikes in the Caribbean and Pacific. You know, the ones where Pete Hegseth ordered the murder of shipwreck survivors. And if the Pentagon fails to comply, they're withholding a quarter of Hegseth's travel budget. So Johnson just signed off on forcing the release of video evidence that could prove Trump and Hegseth committed war crimes. That footage is going to be devastating when it comes out. It's going to show exactly what happened in those strikes, how long the survivors were in the water, what state they were in, and the deliberate decision to kill them with a second missile. And Johnson voted for its release because he was so desperate to pass this defense bill that he had to accept provisions he probably doesn't want. Johnson is trapped. He made promises he can't keep to pass a bill that contradicts Trump's agenda and requires the release of damning evidence against Trump's defense secretary. And if he fails to deliver on any of those promises, his own caucus will remove him. But even if Johnson somehow navigates all of that successfully, he's facing a much bigger problem that he has absolutely no control over. Republicans are abandoning ship in unprecedented numbers. Earlier today, Vox ran an interview with Leanne Caldwell, chief Washington correspondent for Puck News, and what she revealed should terrify every Republican in Congress. According to Caldwell, Mike Johnson's speakership will almost certainly end in the coming year, and there's little he can do to save it. Why? Let me count the ways. First, Johnson is not well liked by his own caucus. See the Epstein Files debacle, the government shutdown disaster, and the fact that he can't pass bills without begging individual members for votes. Nobody respects him. Nobody fears him. He has no political capital and no leverage. He's a placeholder speaker who exists only because Republicans can't agree on anyone better. Second, Donald Trump is deeply unpopular and is weighing down Republicans in a major way. We saw this in the Tennessee special election last week, where a Republican barely eked out a win in a deep red district. Trump won that district by 22 points in 2024, and Republicans almost lost it in the special election. That's a catastrophic shift in just a few months. But third, And this is the big one, Republicans are retiring in absolutely staggering numbers. At the time of Caldwell's report, 23 Republicans had already announced they plan to retire and not seek re-election. That alone would be a major problem. But Caldwell reveals that she personally knows of a full 20 more who plan to retire but haven't announced yet. Let me do the math for you. 23 announced retirements plus 20 secret retirements equals 43 Republicans heading for the exit. 43 members of Congress who have looked at the political landscape, looked at Trump's declining popularity, looked at the chaos and dysfunction of their own caucus, and decided, you know what? I'm out. I don't want to be part of this disaster anymore. That's a staggering number. Republicans currently have a single-digit majority in the House. They can only afford to lose a handful of seats before Democrats take control. And we're talking about 43 retirements. 43 districts where Republicans will have no incumbent advantage, where primary fights could result in extreme lunatics winning nominations, where Democrats have real opportunities to make inroads even in supposedly safe districts. And it gets even worse when you factor in redistricting. The gerrymandering that Republicans have relied on to maintain their House majority is being challenged and reversed across the country. Texas picked up a few new Republican districts, sure, but California is creating new Democratic districts to counteract that. Other states are following suit. The carefully constructed gerrymander that's kept Republicans competitive is falling apart because voters see it as the craven power grab it is. Voters hate gerrymandering. They hate the idea that politicians are choosing their voters instead of voters choosing their politicians. And Democrats are successfully making that case in state after state. So you combine 43 Republican retirements with redistricting that's creating more competitive and Democratic-leaning districts, and you're looking at a potential Democratic wave in 2026 that could flip dozens of seats and give Democrats a commanding majority in the House. And here's the thing about retirements. Even when an incumbent retires in a safe district, there's always a chance for the opposition party to make inroads. Incumbents have name recognition, fundraising advantages, and established relationships with voters. When they retire, all of that goes away. Republican primaries have been producing increasingly extreme candidates who perform terribly in general elections. Normal conservatives are getting primaried by MAGA extremists who then lose to Democrats in districts Republicans should be winning easily. It's happened over and over in the Trump era, and it's going to happen again in 2026 with all these open seats. Caldwell's observation doesn't even factor in all of these dynamics. She's not accounting for how bad the redistricting situation is for Republicans. She's not accounting for the impact of Trump's continued unpopularity. She's not accounting for Democratic enthusiasm and organizing. She's just looking at the raw numbers of retirements and saying Johnson's speakership is doomed. When you add in everything else, the situation for Republicans looks absolutely catastrophic. There is an impending disaster for House Republicans. Their gerrymandering is wildly unpopular. Their president is deeply unpopular and dragging down the entire party. Their incumbents are fleeing in record numbers. Their speaker can't control his caucus and is making promises he can't keep. Their agenda is unpopular. Their policies are failing. And Democrats are organizing, fundraising, and preparing to pick up dozens of new seats in 2026. Mike Johnson is going to lose his speakership. The only question is whether it happens before or after the 2026 elections. He could get removed by his own caucus when he inevitably fails to deliver on one of the many promises he made. Or he could limp along until November 2026, at which point Democrats take back the House and he's out anyway. Either way, Tiny Mike Johnson is done. And honestly, it couldn't happen to a nicer guy. This is someone who was willing to shut down the government to protect the Epstein files. This is someone who enables Trump's worst instincts and rubber stamps illegal military operations. This is someone who prioritizes party loyalty over constitutional duty at every opportunity. The speakership of Mike Johnson is a perfect encapsulation of everything wrong with the Republican Party right now. Weak leadership, dysfunctional caucus, unpopular president, failed policies, mass exodus of experienced members, no positive agenda, just chaos, corruption, and desperate attempts to survive one more day. And Democrats are watching all of this and seeing opportunity. We're organizing in every district. We're recruiting strong candidates. We're raising money. We're preparing for the kind of wave election that could give us not just a narrow majority, but a commanding one that can actually pass legislation and hold Trump accountable. The 2026 midterms are shaping up to be a Democratic tsunami. Republicans know it. That's why 43 of them are retiring rather than face voters. That's why Johnson is making desperate deals just to pass basic legislation. That's why Trump is already trying to undermine confidence in elections he knows he's going to lose. But they can't stop what's coming. The political fundamentals are too strong. Trump is too unpopular. Republicans are too dysfunctional. Democrats are too motivated. The wave is building. And when it hits in November 2026, it's going to wash away Mike Johnson's speakership, flip the House decisively to Democratic control, and create the political conditions for holding Trump and his enablers accountable. 43 Republicans retiring. That's not a normal political cycle. That's a party in full retreat. That's elected officials who see the writing on the wall and are getting out before the disaster hits. That's the clearest signal possible that 2026 is going to be brutal for Republicans. And Mike Johnson, the weakest speaker in modern history, is going to be the face of that disaster. Welcome to the beginning of the end of Republican control of the House.